Yeah, it's me.
Hi, Joe.
I think I can talk now. I'm having some technical difficulties, but I can hear you guys fine.
You're not, are you live? Because I can't, you're
No, I can't get. I can hear you guys, but I can't get video going.
video. Okay. I'm in charge of letting people in, and so
So
I have to pay
YouTube,
attention.
okay. So YouTube is doing its thing.
Oh, good.
So if you guys want to see yourself, go to YouTube, and there it'll be forever. Unless I take it down. So who knows? So we'll see how that goes. I don't know how many people are going to watch it from YouTube, so I can't do that and do this at the same time.
We can't do both.
Yeah, because if I have my phone, I'm running it through by this, then we'll have feedback, and that's unpleasant. So
Linda Jordan, what's your cat's name? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yes, now.
Okay. Yeah, this is Puffers. She's the one that doesn't really like people, but she doesn't understand Zoom. So she goes poof when she sees people. So this is probably about the only time because she doesn't get the Zoom that you see her. There's two more roaming around. Max is over here asleep and the dog's asleep on the floor. So they may put in an appearance later. So how are you, Sigrid?
Oh, fair.
Good to see everybody. I haven't seen people like Roxanne forever and ever and ever.
I know.
There's Andrew. Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Sigrid.
Yep.
There we have Ann Watzel. Did you get the word out with the other two organizations? You're muted, Ann.
Hold your space bar down to temporarily unmute yourself.
Oh, well. There's Horst Schmidt. Good to see you, Horst.
Yeah, I'm not sure that folks understood the different time zone.
Yeah. I
And we
suspect
had one
so.
group from our racial justice group that said that they'll just wait and look at the video when it's and after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Horst.
I forgot that it was Central. I'm so used to Eastern. And so, I forget about you guys in the west of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had a grandson last year who had a law school interview at Harvard, and he's in California, and they told him the interview was going to be at 10 a.m. And he thought, okay, 10 a.m. So he was getting all ready for 10 a.m. But then they called him at 7 a.m. Because he forgot that it was Harvard was in the East Coast. So anyway, yeah.
Did he get in law school?
Oh yeah, he got into law school. He decided against Harvard, but well, I think it was kind of mutual. But he decided to go to NYU. So he's. It turns out that NYU is a rather radical law school, and he's kind of a radical young man. So he's quite happy there. Although he's in California, zooming in on law school. So, there you go. He's still in California.
Charles
What time?
Court.
Yes.
Corey and Ann are here, but they're on YouTube. So that's nice to know that's working.
That's nice to know. Yeah, great. Great.
And
Okay.
Ralph
Well, I
is
think it is
there's
7:01. What?
there's a chat. I think Ralph is having trouble getting audio.
Oh,
Can you help him with that?
let's see. I can't get audio. Help. Ah. I don't think. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
If you have to do, I think, did you join with audio? Because you can come in without audio. So maybe he needs to somehow sign back in and come in and make sure he clicks with audio. That's the only thing I can think of.
No, I think that's correct. So yeah, go ahead, Ralph. Just leave
Go out
us.
and come back in, Ralph.
Come back in, but make sure that you select audio. Select what is it?
It
Cable.
says join with audio, I think.
Yeah, join with audio, and it may join with computer audio or something like that. But yeah, that's what you'll need to do. So,
Charles, how many people are in the Wichita chapter?
well, we have about 30 people, 30, 40 people. We have maybe half of that show up usually for a meeting. But yeah, and we've been around for about 5 years. Roxanne helped us get started at the very beginning, and she's been a stalwart member, very thoughtful member throughout. So I'm always glad to see her. And we've been doing a variety of things nationally, so that's been a lot of fun with the UUA and related organizations. But it's time to get started. My computer says it's 7:03, so let's get started. And I see Ralph hasn't got audio yet, but he can hear us, but he just can't see it. He can't talk back to us. So, well, wouldn't that be nice to have? You can just. But anyway, that's another talking back.
Hearing aids.
The hearing. So, as we begin, please mute your microphone, mute your sound, and you can unmute when you have a question. We're going to probably spend 30, 40 minutes with our guest speakers talking, and then we're going to have questions afterwards. And we're probably going to have a comfortable enough audience so that we can just ask our questions verbally, orally, and then if we get to a really large audience as it grows, we might just have our questions on the chat. But in the meantime, let us assume that we're going to have the questions just through the microphone. But in the meantime, so let's mute all our mics and turn the program over to Roxanne McKenzie. Let me quickly introduce Roxanne. Roxanne, I believe, is from New York, and she has been with us for about 5 years. She is a dedicated humanist. I can tell you that, and she's that's what she's looking for with the Unitarian Church. And I'm always impressed by Roxanne. And our two guest speakers, we have Joseph Shepard, who is the Student Life Director. Well, he's the Multicultural Engagement Campus Life Director at Newman University, which I'm proud of since I spent 31 years there myself. Shepard is a graduate of Wichita State University, where I believe he was president of the student government for a year or so. And he is also very active in the community. One of his activities that I'm very involved in myself is the Democratic Party. He's the director, or he's the chairman of the Sedgwick County Democratic Party. So we're honored to have him. And we also have Rob Simon. Rob Simon is a friend of the church. He is working as the restorative practices consultant with the Wichita Public Schools based at West High School. Rob is a specialist in restorative justice, which is another topic that fascinates me, and I think we should have him come and talk about restorative justice sometime. He is also a musician. He has his own band, and he is the music director at College Hill United Methodist Church for the contemporary worship. So we are very pleased to have Rob Simon with us. So let us turn it
Rob
over.
Simon's wife is our RE director.
That's true. That's true. And so we're happy to have her around as well. So let us turn the floor over to Roxanne, and she can start the discussion. Roxanne.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening, everyone. I see some familiar faces. I miss you guys. COVID sucks.
There you go.
Before I get started, can you hear my heater going on right now?
I think they got you now, Ralph.
Okay.
Where's my picture?
No. Up there.
Okay, maybe that's it. There we go.
You're good.
Wait,
Huh?
where am I getting the sound from? I'm getting
One of those
Am I
computers.
getting it from your computer?
I think you are, but I don't know. Do you? You had sound for a minute?
No, suddenly everything's set.
Should I just go ahead, Charles, or?
Sigrid, you're not muted. We
What?
need you to mute.
I am.
We're hearing you. Your conversation with Ralph.
Oh, is that me? You listening to me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, hey,
All
stop.
right.
Sorry about that.
Yay.
I got sound on one computer and everything else on the other computer. Okay, carry on, guys.
Okay.
Always technical stuff going on.
She's mute.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys tonight. I wanted to tell you a quick little story before we actually got started. So my husband and I, John, are both avid motorcyclists, and we've both been riding for maybe 25 years or more. He is on his 6th motorcycle, and I'm on my 3rd. And last year, actually late 2018, beginning of 2019, he started planning our next big motorcycle adventure. Every year we do a big motorcycle ride. And this one was going to be the biggest by far, 11 days, 9 states, and I forget how many thousands of miles. And we love to travel. We love to go on adventures and see different places. But as you can imagine, hotels can get a little expensive, and an 11-day trip was going to be a bit pricey. So my husband had an epiphany one night, and he came to me very excited, and he said, camping will greatly change our life. It's going to just make a world of difference. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not camping. It's just not going to happen. I don't camp. And he said, it's going to happen. You'll see. And I said, it's not going to happen. So slowly over the year, as he was planning this trip, he kept purchasing more and more things. A tent, sleeping bags, camp chair, camp table, camp oven. He said, Roxanne, if you cook me a meal outside on my camp oven, I will marry you all over again. Needless to say, we have not taken second vows as of yet. Anyways, I gave him a list. Thanks for laughing. I gave him a list of 3 reasons why I wasn't going to go camping. The first reason was mosquitoes, snakes, spiders, bears, spiders. Serious about that. The second reason I wasn't going to go camping was because no air conditioning, no indoor plumbing. That did not sound like a vacation to me. That sounded like purgatory. And then the third reason, which really did surprise me, but it came out of my mouth, blah, and it was, besides, Black people don't camp. He reminded me that he and his family camped when he was a kid. And I reminded him that my family did not camp, that his family was weird and he was from North Carolina. And again, we weren't going to go camping. But slowly, he kept insisting that we were going to go camping. He planned several romantic escapades at rustic cabins, kind of inching me into it. And he continued to buy more things. Recently, he got a portable potty to make life better for myself. And again, not going to happen. But he came across a Black couple, the only other people in America, too, that go camping. And they have a YouTube station, a YouTube channel. And so he made me watch several of these episodes. And in one episode, the couple talked about their new philosophy, which was Black faces and white spaces. And basically what it meant was, even if you don't see someone who looks like you, you should still do it, whatever it may be. Don't let that keep you from living your best life. So I shared this story with Rob and Joseph a couple of weeks ago when we got together on Zoom to talk about what we wanted to share tonight on this program. And they both dug the story, and we kind of developed it from there. So Joseph is going to go first, and then I'll share a little bit with you. And then I think Rob's gonna close us out, and then we'll be open for questions. Thank you.
All righty. Well, good evening, and thank you so much for that great segue, Roxanne, into this conversation. It's going to be very difficult to top. I'm Joseph Shepard, and as Charles said earlier, I serve as the Director of Multicultural Engagement and Campus Life at Newman University, which is a small private faith-based Catholic institution. And if you all know anything about Catholicism and or the faith of Catholicism, you might look at me and probably know that I am one of the only ones in the room more often than not on our campus. In fact, to be specific, there's only 3 African-American males that work on campus, 4 African-Americans total. The 2 other African-American males that work on our campus are basketball coaches. And so when you look outside of the world of athletics, I'm actually the only one that's on the staff faculty side of the house. And as you can imagine, I consider it both a privilege but a burden to be in this space to help my colleagues understand the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion through the lens of being a Black person, but to also learn. I think being the only one in the room or being a Black face in a white space grants me the opportunity to lean in to help see other people's experiences and how they see the world. Many of my students at Newman University come from rural parts of Kansas. They come from states, or they come from cities within Kansas that don't even have stoplights, that don't even have access to grocery stores within a 30-minute drive. They have to drive an hour out and sometimes even longer to get to the nearest grocery store. When they go grocery shopping, they're grocery shopping for the entire month, knowing that they're not going back to that grocery store anytime soon. They also have grown up in a town where they're not only attending school with people that they know, but everybody knows everybody. And so also understanding that being a Black face in a white space grants me the opportunity to learn, because being Black and growing up in a large metropolitan cities my entire life, I don't know what it's like to grow up in rural Kansas. I don't know the struggles, but I also don't know the strength and the beauties of rural Kansas. So back to the purpose of this conversation and focusing on being the only one in the room as a Black face in a white space. Like I said, it is a privilege and a burden. And I was hired on at Newman with the intent to spread the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm the first person in my role. So laying the framework, laying the foundation, and essentially helping my colleagues unpack the importance of racial reconciliation and the importance of addressing racism through a intersectional lens was really important for me, because it's really important when we talk about Black faces and white faces to also talk about intersectionality, that Black people, all Black people are not monolithic, meaning our experiences are not the same, our opinions are not the same, our thoughts are not the same. I'm sorry, and my Wi-Fi may not be super great, so I'm trying to adjust my sound right now, so I really apologize. Hopefully you all can hear me a little bit better. But knowing that our experiences are not monolithic as African-American or Black people really encourages me to talk to our colleagues and our students about the importance of intersectionality. And so really talking about what it means to be Black, but also what it means to be Black and LGBTQ, what it means to be Black and poor, what it means to be Black and female, and understanding that the identities that Black people bring to the table from an intersectional lens presents different challenges. And so really, as we talk about this, we really have to make sure that talking about being Black faced in a white space presents very different circumstances and very different situations depending on who you are and how you identify. But one of the things that I've come to learn, really respect about being a Black face in a white space, is that I have this opportunity to break down barriers and kick open doors for more people who look like me. I think one thing that is really important for people to understand, that whenever you are the only one in the room, particularly in this situation, being a Black face in a white space, I see it as an opportunity to expand the conversation, to open up minds and to open up perspective, so that way I can kick open doors, so that way I'm no longer the only one in that room. Our moral and ethical obligation, being a Black space in a white space, as Roxanne said, being a Black face in a white camping space, right? Our job is to help shed light on the experience, to change perception for other people, so that we can help other people who look like us walk through those same doors. So with that being said, really, the overall message that I wanted to share with you all today, particularly for some of our friends who may not be Black in this space right now, is that your role in this movement of helping more Black faces being in white spaces is to ensure that we help the few Black faces that are in these white spaces feel comfortable enough to share their thoughts, to share their opinions, but more importantly, to share their experiences. Because when we grant Black faces and white spaces the opportunity to share their experiences, the experiences that make us uncomfortable, the experiences that make us curious, the experiences that make us want to know more, when we grant our Black faces and white spaces the opportunity to do that, we are liberating ourselves, and we are granting other people permission to walk in that space who look like us, to do the same thing. That's what I found during my time at my institution at Newman University, being there for 2.5 years, being the first Black person to serve in this role and the first person overall. It has been that the fact that my colleagues and my students have been open to learning more about what it's like to be Black in America, especially after the murder of George Floyd and the murder of Breonna Taylor. Being open to those conversations and being open to hearing the unsexy things, the things that really make us perhaps cringe. Those are the conversations that have led to progress and to growth. And so as I conclude my time speaking with you all, because I want to leave time for the others, is that being a Black face in a white space, it grants us the opportunity to kick open doors. But also being a white face in a white space, acknowledging that there are only few Black spaces gives you the opportunity to be an ally to help amplify the experiences of those Black voices and faces in that space. And so I am really grateful for the opportunity to come today to share my experiences with you all, but I look forward to the Q&A dialogue a little bit later on. And thank you so much for granting me the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Joseph.
You're muted, Roxanne.
Okay, there you go. I was saying, thank you, Joseph. You articulated a lot of things that I wasn't able to articulate. So thank you very much. I'm excited. Okay, I am my mother's daughter. I can't tell you the story of how I came to be the way I am without sharing with you my mother's story, because it's very significant and we have a similar history. So I love talking about my mom. I love her. She's an extraordinary woman. And I want to tell you a little bit about her. My mom's name is Annie, and she was born in Moultrie, Georgia. And my father's name was Rocco. He was born in Moultrie, Georgia. And did I say Bainbridge? I hope I said Bainbridge. Mom's Bainbridge, my father's Moultrie. They lived about 60 miles apart. They didn't know each other. But both of their families in the early 50s decided that they were going to leave Georgia and migrate north for more opportunities, a better life. And so at the age of about 7, mother and her family arrived in Geneva, New York. And she can't remember how long they stayed there, but eventually they found a 2-story farmhouse and 100 acres that they purchased further east outside of Rome, New York. And there, my grandfather got a job on Griffith Air Force Base in Rome, New York. And because the family only had one car, he would drive the car. He would have the car all the time. And so the family, 12 kids in total, at different points in time. And my grandmother, if they needed to get anything, they would have to do it by foot. So if they needed some supplies, even though they lived on a working farm, they'd have to walk about 2 miles to the country store. They started school. My mother and her brothers and sisters started school in a 1-room schoolhouse, and that was a mile away, so they walked to and fro. And the kids wanted to go to church, and so the closest church was 3 miles away, and it just so happened to be Catholic, and that's how our family winded up being Catholic. The kids were baptized there. My mother met my father when she was about 15 or 16 at a baseball game, and then several years later, they were married in that Catholic church. Initially, they lived in an apartment in Rome, and my mother said that she hated it because it was noisy and too many people around. So they purchased a trailer and placed it on my grandparents' land. Soon after, they had 2 kids, my oldest brother, David and Michael. And then there was a fire, unfortunately, in the trailer. Everything was lost, no lives, thank goodness. But eventually they built a home on that land, and my grandparents deeded the land to my parents. So they had 2 kids, one on the way, and 100 acres. And that was life. My mom was a nurse at the city hospital. She worked there for over 30 years. She said that she went through nursing school with one other Black woman, but in her history, in her career as a nurse, she never worked with another Black person. She was very active and outgoing. She, let's see, she was a den mother, a Boy Scout den mother, a Girl Scout den mother. She would take classes like ceramics. She was on a bowling league. She went out for several months without us knowing and learned how to roller skate. She line danced, bocce ball, the list goes on. She sold at different times Avon and Tupperware, and we used to host parties at our house. White faces, very few, if ever, any people of color. If there were Black faces in the crowd, it was either our family, you know, the immediate family or extended family. So pretty white world I grew up in. And then very similar for me, the first day of school, first grade, excuse me, getting a little nervous, courage. Slow down. So the first week of first grade, sometime during that week is when I realized that I was other. And it was quite devastating. I went home and cried, and mother tried her best to get me through the period, but because she was pretty stoic herself, I don't think she could put herself in my position anymore. At any given time during my 12 years of school, it was my brothers or myself. We had maybe a cousin or two come through every once in a while and spend a half a year or a year. And there was a time during my junior year that a family of 4 Black boys moved to the area, and they were around my age. They went to school with me. But for the most part, it was myself or my brothers. I graduated in a class of 131 students, and I was the only Black person. I was really excited to get to college. I thought that things would change. I'd get my first boyfriend, which I did. But oddly enough, I still felt other. And it was odd because now I didn't quite fit in with the people that I actually looked like. I was accused of being bougie and maybe backwoods hickish kind of thing. When I went to Greensboro, North Carolina, and went to school there, I was that Yankee, and it was challenging. It was quite a bit of a culture shock. My career, I did work in property management. I was a realtor for 12, 14 years. Currently, I do admin work at a nonprofit organization, and this is actually the first time that I have worked with other Black people in the office. There's 2 social workers in my office right now, so there's 3 Black women. It's quite extraordinary. It's a different experience. And my husband has a very similar past. His parents built a house, though, and it was in a Black neighborhood. He went to City Elementary and middle school, but the population was about 1/3 Black. However, he attended a private high school, and when he graduated, he was one of 13 in his class, the only Black person in a class of 13. And he's had a career in military, law enforcement, government, and private security work. And ultimately, he is typically the only Black or one of 2 or 3. So I feel like we have lived quite isolated in some instances. He and I have lived and currently live in a predominantly white neighborhood. We have no kids, no pets, 2 motorcycles, We love staying at bed and breakfasts. We love to travel, as I said, on the motorcycles. About 2 years ago, we discovered Airbnbs and we like staying at those. And it looks like there might be camping in my future, though I'm not excited about that. Thank you for your time.
Well, I guess I get to bring up the rear now. And I want to just kind of start by telling you my kind of my origin story and paint a picture for you. So I'll begin by saying that I was born in Texarkana, Arkansas in 1953. Now that year is important, and I want you to kind of keep that in mind. We'll do a little calculation along the way. Also, for those of you who may not know, my hometown is a twin city like Kansas City. Half of it is in Texas and half of it is in Arkansas. So I was born in Arkansas because that's where the hospital was, but I spent my whole life on the Texas side growing up. In the neighborhood where I grew up, it was all Black, with the exception of 2 neighborhood grocery stores that were less than a block from my house. Those featured white people that I saw on a fairly regular basis. And then about halfway through my growing up years there, a gentleman bought a place right next door to us that was kind of a trading post where he dealt with used items and that kind of stuff, and he was white. When I went to kindergarten, all of my classmates were Black. My teacher was Black. When I started elementary school, for the first 3 years of elementary school, 1st through 3rd grade, I went to the elementary school that was named after my neighborhood, Newtown Elementary, and it was right across the alley from my house. But when I was in 4th grade, they built a new school, and so we moved to Goree Elementary, which was named after the family that lived right across the alley from my house. So all the way through 6th grade, I was in all Black schools. When I went to church on Sunday, I was in an all Black church. When I graduated from the 6th grade and went to junior high school for the first time, there was a junior senior high school called Dunbar. All of the students and all of the teachers were Black. But in 1968, the federal government declared that schools were going to be integrated from that point forward nationwide. And so, like many other communities, our community integrated the schools. So for the very first time in 1968, as a 10th grader, I was attending school with white students, and I had white teachers. For the most part, there were just a few Black teachers on campus, and I think most of them were coaches, as I recall. The interesting thing about being there is that that wasn't a problem for me. I just thought it was an adventure. I never really thought of myself as Black until and unless someone made me think of myself that way. Otherwise, I just thought of myself as a human being. And for the most part, I got along just famously in my last 3 years of high school, even though I was in an integrated setting for the very first time. But it wasn't all a bed of roses. For example, during the years that I was there, we had hotheads on both sides of the coin, you know, and because of that, we had some fights that broke out between Black kids and white kids, and we had 2 legitimate, let's call them riots that happened, started by the hotheads on one side or the other. I was never engaged in any of that. I was more likely to be part of the politics that followed. So for example, after the second riot, the Black community in my hometown declared to the school board, we need to do something different for the sake of our children, and here's what we'd like you to do. And they felt like they weren't getting a good response from that. And so they said, okay, since you're not responding the way we think you should, we're just going to take our kids out of the school, set up our own temporary schools until you figure out what you need to do. So I was part of all of that. But as things kind of settled down and the hotheads got taken care of on both sides, I was able to graduate in a class of 492. The following year, my sister next to me in age graduated in a class of 496. And then it was time to go off to college, but I wasn't planning to go. For one thing, I grew up relatively poor. My parents couldn't afford to send me. I had no interest in working and going to school at the same time. So what I really had planned to do was join the military and do my stint there and then come out on the GI Bill and hopefully be able to go to school then. The only reason that didn't happen for me was because from 7th grade on, I had these 3 buddies that we were like thick as thieves, the 4 of us, good friends all the way through. And we had a mentor in common. And as we were all graduating seniors, we decided to go by and visit Reverend Thomas, who of course was a Black pastor. And he started visiting with us about what our plans were. And in doing so, he discovered that none of us were planning to go to college. And that kind of freaked him out because he knew us to be very talented young men and said, you know, why aren't you guys going to college? Well, we all had our reasons and I shared what mine were. But the thing that really caught my attention was he said, but you know, if you don't have money to go to college, you can get financial aid. And I'm like, you do what? You know, it was news to me. I'd not had any conversation about financial aid. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know that there were loans and grants that you could get. So he hooked me up with someone at a historically Black college, a university called Texas College in Tyler, Texas. And sure enough, rather than being in the military that following fall, I was in school. I didn't have a clue what I was going to be doing because I hadn't thought about it. But I figured it out pretty quickly and started to do my work there. And in this setting, I was back to being in an all-Black school, with one exception. While I matriculated there for 4 years, we did for a while have a student who was an older gentleman, probably in his 60s, and he was originally from France, and he attended school with us. But that was the only person who did not have a dark face. Well, I managed to get through college with honors and was ready to move on to what was next for me. And long story short, I wound up in Wichita because of a gentleman who at that time was the director of secondary personnel for the school district here in Wichita. And he had matriculated at the same institution that I did, and he made it a point to do recruiting there every year. So one year, the year that I graduated, he came to campus and somebody said to him, there's this kid here you need to meet, talking about me. And they said to me, there's this guy here you need to meet. And we got a chance to meet, and he impressed me and I impressed him. And before our visit was over, he opened up his briefcase, pulled out a sheet of paper, slid it across the table to me and said, if you'd like to come teach in Wichita, we would love to have you. Well, I didn't know diddly squat about Wichita, but what I did know was that the starting salary wasn't all that great, and I had some opportunities that I thought would pay a little bit better. So I said, thank you, I will consider it, and I tucked it away. Well, I spent that summer after I graduated kind of chasing down these different opportunities to work in other areas, because as a social studies major, I had a number of possibilities that I could do. But they didn't pan out, long story short, until I was left with, okay, I guess I could go to Wichita and teach for a while and see how that works. So I got in touch with him. And he said, yes, we still would love to have you. So I signed my name on the dotted line and then became a teacher in the Wichita Public Schools. As a teacher in the Wichita Public Schools at that time, this was in 1975 when I started. As I recall, my first assignment was in a building where I think there were 3 Black teachers. Otherwise, they were all white. Most of the students were white. Then I was transferred after my first year to another school, which was in a Black neighborhood. So there were more Black students and a few more Black teachers. And let me just kind of shift for a little bit to say that I also was continuing to be part of a Black congregation for many of my first years in Wichita, until at some point I kind of outgrew the theology. There were some things about how things were done in that church that just didn't fit well with me. So my wife and I started to explore some other possibilities. Among those was the Unitarian Church, where we attended for a while together. We also attended the Unity Church. And interestingly, we liked the spirit of both of those churches in some ways, but they were all white for the most part. And then we had an opportunity to sing for a wedding at College Hill United Methodist Church. And at that time, I'd never been in the building before, but we went into a space where we sat down and waited for our chance to sing as part of the wedding. And the officiating minister stood in front of the marrying couple, and he said something that really caught our attention. He said, you know, people say that when two people marry, the two become one. He said, but that's not really how it works. He said, you remain you, and you remain you, and the two of you create something new called us. So the two become three. And my wife and I looked at each other and went, now that was cool. So we decided we'd show up on a Sunday morning to see what things were like for a regular Sunday morning service. So we sat in the main sanctuary and we opened up the bulletin. And as we opened the bulletin, there was a greeting message. Then there was a quote from the Old Testament, which was very familiar. Then there was a quote from the Talmud, which was saying the same thing, but in a different way. And then there was a quote from the Tao, which said the same thing, but in a different way. And we looked at each other and went, oh, this is pretty cool. And so we started to hang out there a little bit and noticed that, you know, things were pretty white around there. But we liked the theology, so we continued to hang out there for a while. And long story short, you fast forward about 20 plus years, and we're still a part of that congregation as official members, and I work there as a music director, as was mentioned earlier. But what's been interesting for me is that being an educator in Wichita, working in schools, there's been a lot of change over the last, let's say, 20 years. There's much more diversity than there used to be when I first started my career. But part of my career has been to travel the state as well and to do presentations in school districts all across the state. And I did that for a number of years. And in many instances, if I would roll into town with my vehicle and my gear, I would be the only dark face in town all day long until I left to come home again. So I'm used to kind of sliding from one type of area to another, sometimes around all blacks, sometimes around all whites, sometimes in a totally diverse group of people that has all kinds of people as part of it. And it's interesting for me, and I'll say this and I'll let you go for our questions. It's interesting to me that I still see myself as a person who doesn't think of myself as a Black person unless somebody invites me to do that somehow. Otherwise, I just go through life being a human and try to respond to the environments and the people that I come in contact with just as a human. And I think that has served me well. But every once in a while, somebody brings it to my attention in ways that are kind of interesting, sometimes a little dangerous, but it's okay. You know, I've learned to respond to all of what happens in my life with a kind of a Zen-like saying that says, it's whatever it is, it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it just is what it is. And I deal with what it is and move on. But it is interesting, often quite interesting, to be a Black face in a mostly white space. And that's what I will share for the moment.
Rob, I have to say thank you. And it's a wonder to me that you had one Black teacher, let alone most Black teachers. I've never had a Black teacher or a Black professor in my life.
Well, that's interesting. Well, thank you guys. That was very interesting. Let's open the floor to questions, and let's hope that we can all kind of take turns and ask questions politely and move ahead. So who has a question?
I just am curious, Roxanne, where did you go to school in Greensboro?
I attended the University of North Carolina at Greensboro.
When were you there? I was on the faculty there for 6 years.
Really? It would have been 93, 94, something like that.
I was long gone. I was there from 72 to 78.
Small world.
We'll talk about that another time.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question, and that is the three of you guys' experience. Is there any insight that you think you can share that might be relevant to the Unitarian Universalist Church's fight against white supremacy?
That's a really deep question, Charles, but let me try and begin and answer this way. I was doing a presentation at Robinson Middle School a number of years ago, actually 2 presentations. And between the 2 presentations, I went down the hallway to get a drink of water. And I saw 2 girls in the middle of the floor with a big piece of white paper and a bunch of black letters. I wasn't sure what they were up to, but I knew it was something. So I just kind of noticed that, and I went back to do my other program. And then when I packed up and went down that hallway again, the girls were not there, but their work was. Turned out that they had just created a simple bulletin board, black letters on white paper. But it was a quote from, give me a second to pull this into mind, Carl Sagan. And the quote said, trying to remember exactly how it went. I think it started out, every human being has 99.9% of the same DNA sequences. All humans, no matter how ethnically diverse, are essentially identical. And I took that away in my memory because I thought it was such a succinct way of talking about who we are as human beings. I think a big reason why we have the difficulties we have with race relations is because too many people have been influenced by junk science that wants to claim that any particular sub-racial group is different or superior to another. That simply doesn't hold water when you really dig into the science behind it. We are much more alike than we are different. So with white supremacists or black supremacists, or however you want to look at it, when people want to make us seem to be more different than we are, they're barking up the wrong tree. They're following a path of junk science that has nothing to do with the truth of who we are. And not only is that true scientifically, but it's true spiritually as well. So I think as Unitarians, Unitarian Universalists, I think that's a way to emphasize how you approach things, is try to help people understand and embrace the truth of who we are as human beings. That's what I would focus on. And I think some of that can be done by just asking really pointed questions that people find themselves not able to answer with anything other than an opinion. And opinions don't count nearly as much as empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I think I would add 2 things. I've been attending UU churches since, I don't know, maybe 15 years. And I think one thing that they do many good things, but 2 things that they do really well, I think, is justice work and education. I was very impressed with the education of the youth. And so I think I would continue that and be about justice work and be about, uplifting the oppressed people and showing that, like Rob said, we're more alike than we are different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Oh, here's a question.
So I really enjoyed hearing from all 3 of you. Thank you. I'm from Europe and moved to the US, and sometimes I feel like the outsider, the odd one out, but I usually don't really notice that I'm different. I feel like just a person among other people, much like the experience you share. But I sometimes, when I get into a somewhat hostile environment, I can suddenly be very aware that I don't fit in, that I do have that the first time I say anything everybody recognizes I do have an accent and so on. And so it's what are your strategies for coping with that if you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you suddenly realize you are not fitting in? That's my one question. The other question is about Roxanne mentioned that you didn't have any black teachers, and Wichita State and higher education in general has just recently become really aware of this issue, and I think at least some institutions are finally trying to address it, but it's going to take a very long time because faculty turnover is slow.
Do you want to go, Rob? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess I would I'll share a quick little story, because I think part of the answer, Holger, for me is my plan is to continue to mature as a human being, and I can look at some ways that I have done that over the years and be kind of proud of it. And the story I will tell is I was walking down the street, not sure where I was headed, minding my own business. It was a lovely kind of summer day, warm, blue skies, white puffy clouds, that whole thing, right? I'm just walking along, and a vehicle passes by me on the street where I'm walking on the sidewalk, and somebody yells out, "Nigger!" and as they go by. And so I gave them a one finger salute back, but you can imagine which finger I used, right? I felt pretty smug about that. But fast forward a few years, I'm walking on another street, and this is both in Wichita, minding my own business. Lovely day, just like the one before. A vehicle drives by, and the exact same thing happens. And when it does, I just say, "God bless you," from the depths of my heart, and I just move on with the rest of my life. I was proud of that moment. And I guess I will share one more quick story too. And those of you who go to UU in Wichita, you will know this, but my wife is white. And when we first came together, we had a bit of an issue with both of our families getting used to the fact that we were in an interracial relationship. But that kind of settled down pretty quickly. And then there were no problems moving forward for the most part. But I had this really interesting experience after I got to know my wife's grandfather. We would go down to visit him and her grandmother on many occasions. And on one of those occasions, I was sitting at the kitchen table with her grandpa, and we were just visiting about this, that, and the other. He was such a sharp guy, and he loved to ask questions, and we had some great conversations about all kinds of things. So we were talking about whatever, sitting at his kitchen table. And at one point he said, "Well, Robert, tell me this. Why do you think the niggers have such a difficult time with things?" And I just answered his question, and we went on with our conversation, because I realized what had happened was he was so comfortable with me that he spoke to me just like he would anybody else. And I didn't see that as disrespect at all. It was just conversation, the way he would normally talk, and had no disrespect intended. That's that's just been how my experience has been. It's like when I show up in the world, I show up in the world as a human being, and most people treat me that way. The ones that don't generally keep it a secret, and the ones that don't keep it a secret, well, there's a warrior spirit in me too, and I know how to step up to whatever challenges they give me, but I rarely have to deal with that. So that's how I would respond to your first question.
Thank you.
How about looking at Marcia Ellsworth's questions in chat, all three of you?
I want to share a story myself too, regarding Holger's question. I was an exchange student in Japan the summer before my senior year in high school. And I was at a cookout or a picnic, whatever. And I was the only Black person, obviously, in Japan. And there were a bunch of Japanese students. And then there was a white family there who the parents, I think they were on an exchange program and they were teachers. The white kids spoke pretty fluent Japanese. And so they were interpreting for me. And the Japanese students would ask a question, the white kids would translate the question. And I was quite shocked that the direction that the questions went. They started off with, who are you and why are you here? Where are you from? And when I said New York State, the questions started going down the line of, are you in a gang? Have you ever shot anyone? Have you ever attacked anyone? So that encounter was very disturbing. I was really upset about it, and it stayed with me for a number of years. What I learned from the encounter, though, is that people have preconceived notions of who you are. We all have it, regardless of color. I may look at Charles and think something. I may look at Rachel and think something. I may hear Holger and think something. But we all have preconceived notions. And one thing that I have done, maybe to my default, is when I meet people, which I learned from my mom, is, you get more, what is that saying? You attract more flies with honey kind of thing. Yeah. So it's always be polite and put your best foot forward. And so, for example, in the motorcycle community, there are divisions of races in the motorcycle community. And when John and I are out and about, you don't necessarily see a lot of other Black riders. And so we go to events and there are a lot of white riders. And we treat the event as an opportunity for a white person who may not have had a conversation with a Black person before, as an opportunity to show those people that we're not that different than you are. We love motorcycle riding, we plan trips, etc. So I think it's a lot about beating back negative expectations and putting your best foot forward.
It was called to our attention that there's some questions in the chat, so I want to just respond real quickly to a couple of those. Ms. Ellsworth asked, did you feel expectations were lower for you as a Black person? And honestly, I can't say for sure in every instance where I've been. But what I can say is that my favorite teacher all time was a language arts teacher that I had when I was in high school in an integrated setting. She was white, had her for 2 years. And she was probably in her 40s, when I was her student. What I didn't know though was that the first year I had her was her first year teaching. She had had a family and then gone back and gotten her degree and then started teaching. I had no idea. I just knew that we resonated very well together, and I kept in touch with her over the years until she died some years ago. My experience was that people appreciated how I showed up. One of my favorite social studies class when I was in high school was one where the teacher was incredibly creative. For example, had the room set up with two sides of the room facing each other because he did a lot of debate and that kind of stuff. And there were team captains on both sides. I was one of the team captains, even though I was probably the only black kid in the room. So there was those kinds of things that happened for me. But here's an interesting thing, and part of the reason why I invoked the year I was born and some of the years of things that happened was it has made me curious to wonder how I could graduate from high school and never have a single conversation with a counselor about options to go to college. But all of the counselors were white. And you know, it's like, how would I know that I didn't even have that conversation unless it was brought to my attention? And it never was. So it took a mentor from the Black community to tell me what a counselor should have had I ever had that opportunity to have a conversation, but it just didn't happen. The other question I'll respond to real quickly is, my wife and I remarkably have had very few times, if any, where we have felt any kind of discrimination for being in a mixed marriage. I think one thing we both remember really well was we were in South Texas at a Red Lobster restaurant, and this was when our son was like maybe 4 years old. We were sitting having a meal, and at one point my wife kind of conspirationally said to me, when you get a chance, I want you to turn around and look at the couple that's over in the corner. So I did nonchalantly turn around and I looked at him, and it was a white couple. And let me just say, if looks could kill, we would have been dead sitting right where we were. And it was so obvious that they had a problem with the fact that we were an interracial couple sitting in a Red Lobster having a meal with our 4-year-old kid. But we have rarely, if ever, had any other kinds of experiences like that, which is remarkable on the one hand, but it's also a tribute to how we show up in the world as another. So that's how I would respond to that. Joseph, are you still there? Because there was a question for you as well.
I am still here. I'm sorry for delaying the response. My Wi-Fi is really questionable, but hopefully you all can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, we can hear you. Oh. You're muted now, Joseph.
I'm sorry about that. I was reading the question, just I was teaching.
Ah.
Oh, yes. Well, when we talk about being a black face in a white space, particularly surrounding this conversation regarding my time as student body president at Wichita State, that was a very interesting leadership experience, because for many people, I was the only African American that they remember or recall ever serving in that position in the institution's history. But as we looked back, I was actually the second African American person, but only two at the time, myself included. And so a lot of the issues that I wanted to push were issues that impacted, in my opinion, Black people, low-income people, and underrepresented populations. But it was also during a time where, you know, it was a bit unorthodox for a student body president to be pushing issues like ensuring that low-income students had access to additional scholarship funds and or funding to get through college, so they wouldn't have to take out a lot of loans. I mean, these are conversations that we see happening today in 2021, but when I was student body president in 2016 at Wichita State, it was a bit unorthodox. So I think as a result of a lot of people not understanding where my passion came from and understanding my experiences of being a Black man who grew up in a low income and or poor community. A lot of people didn't understand why I was advocating for the things that I advocated for. So, I did experience some people, kind of telling me that perhaps, if I kept trying to push the status quo or kept trying to push the envelope, that I wouldn't get into grad school. I got into grad school. I'm actually working on my doctorate, but I even had people who, when opportunities came available, even after I graduated, they made it their business to contact these companies and tell them not to hire me, simply because of the experiences that I had during my leadership time at Wichita State. I didn't get access to a lot of the meetings that other student body presidents got with higher up officials because of the issues that I pushed for and how it made people feel uncomfortable. So needless to say, I think it's really important for people to recognize that oftentimes when you are a Black face in a white space, the reason why I started the conversation off saying that it is a privilege and a burden is because many times you are faced with situations and circumstances where you have to do what is right, even when it's going to cost your social and political capital. And oftentimes there's nothing for you to gain out of that situation other than doing what is right. But I believe that when you are rooted in your values and your morals and just doing what is right, then you need nothing else to gain from the situation other than knowing you're doing the right thing.
Okay, thank you. So are there other questions or comments? I know we have some people in the audience with considerable expertise in these areas. So if there's other comments or suggestions that, or questions.
I have a question. Andrew Davis. I'm really interested in, it seems like there's an interpersonal lane of people trying to deal with issues like this in terms of Black faces and white spaces. And then there's an institutional one. And I think everyone attacks or engages the interpersonal lane in very, very personal ways. I'm interested, though, if any of you have found small things that you might recommend from your experience, not huge changes, but small changes that you think could lead to really significant effects that could make it easier for people to find ways to engage the world when they find themselves in a minority position, for lack of a better way of saying it. If that makes sense.
I don't know if this is going to be helpful or not, but it made me think of a question I was going to ask you all. Have any of you ever gone to a Black church before?
Yes, I have.
I have.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's unforgettable. There's more energy and more enthusiasm put into worshiping God in a Black church than I've seen anywhere else in the world. And I've been around. You can hear that I am also a minority here, being British. And no, yes. So.
Well, I was doing a little research for this evening because I was curious about racially diverse congregations, and some of it. The research shows that if a church is diverse, it's typically because it's typically a white preacher or minister, and Black people or people of color come into the white space. But typically it's not the other way around. White people don't start to attend and stay at a Black church. And I just thought that was interesting. And then some other information that I also found interesting is that once the church got to like a 50-50 balance, then the white people would leave the church, and then it would become predominantly Black or predominantly of color. And so I was thinking of that when you were asking the question, Andrew, that I don't think that we share enough spaces together. And if we did that, I think that it's Pollyanny of me to think it, but I do believe that if we shared more spaces together, that things would certainly improve.
I will just piggyback on that because I was thinking the same thing. I think part of the answer to your question, Andrew, is those of us who are in a minority, whatever we look like and however we are minorities, I think it's about learning how to do what's called code switching, being able to shift from one world to another and be able to function within it. You know, a big part of what makes it possible for us to discriminate against one another is because we don't really know one another. We don't really understand how much we have in common. And just a couple of other quick things from my background that really kind of represent that dance between worlds that I've done. One of those three guys that I was best friends with from 7th grade through high school was one of, let's say, a dozen or so African-American students who actually started to attend the white school a year earlier than was required. So that would have been like in 1967. But as a result of that, there were relationships built there. So long story short, when we were all in high school together, my friend who had gone to one of the white junior high schools decided to run for student government president. And I was his campaign manager, and we ran a great campaign. But he ran against a guy that he'd known from his junior high school, who was also really sharp and everything. And when it was all said and done, we lost the election, but only by 6 votes in a school that had 1,500 kids. So there was something about being able to code switch in that environment. Also, part of that was when there were problems that happened, is particularly any kind of thing that smacked of race problems, my buddies and I would get called to the office, not because we were in any kind of trouble, but because the administrators knew that if something was going on, we would know what the deal was and would be able to answer their questions. So we were like consultants for the administration during that time. The other thing I'll share real quickly is that my church that I grew up in was one of 2 or 3 churches. I know there were 2 for sure because it happened the same night, that were burned to the ground by arsonists, white supremacist arsonists, you know. So it's been an interesting journey all along the way, you know, people who somehow recognize my Blackness and put me in danger or at risk because of that. But I just keep doing what I do. It's like I can only be responsible for how I show up in the world. And so I show up in the world the best way I know how. And most people respect me for that. And I don't have difficulties. And when I do, like I say, there's a warrior spirit in me that knows how to do that in slick ways and in not so slick ways.
So, Roxanne, that was a really interesting question, I thought. I've been to Black churches, but only ever when I was specifically invited to come. You know, Darius is singing on Sunday, why don't you join us this weekend? And then I felt welcome, and I didn't feel unwelcome other times, but I didn't want to impose. I thought that Black churches serve as a safe space where, at least on a Sunday morning, Black people don't have to put up with racism because they are among other Black people. So I didn't want to, you know, be invasive in that way. So it never occurred to me that actually I accomplished the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, if I may.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. My name is Bob Coaches. I'm down at the Lake Chapala Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Chapala, Mexico.
Oh, wow.
But my
Wow.
question is, given the history of the UU's stance on social justice, fighting for inequality, fighting against inequality, and inclusion, what is your view of why there are not more multi-ethnicity and more multicultural members and congregations?
Who's your question to?
That's a whole nother presentation, I think. There's a lot there. There was an actual history of the UU being a little bit more integrated at one time. I don't know if you guys know the story of Martin Luther King was actually thinking about using the UU as for lack of a better word, like the platform to deliver his equity, inclusion, civil rights movement kind of thing. But ultimately, he decided to stay with the Black churches. He thought he would get a little bit more ground that way. And I don't remember, maybe Charles would know, there's a history that there was supposed to be some diversity work and monies towards like the Black UUs, but things didn't happen that way. Didn't pan out. So I would think it just in a short answer, you have a lot of Black people who are devout Christians, and when you go to a UU, we're very inclusive and maybe not so godlike, Christ-like, and so they miss that. Also, they miss maybe the formality of church, the 2 hours of church, the praying, the music, that kind of thing. And so culturally, I think there's a difference that is hard to overcome sometimes.
Yep, we were just schooled in 2 Sunday services on the history of Black UU and the history of the inclusion of the Blacks over the centuries in the UU movement and in America. 2 wonderful services. So I'm kind of familiar with that, but I've noticed in previous congregations that I belong to that it was hard to reach out and get an inclusion with members of that community. Maybe part of it is what you were saying,
Yeah.
that there's a cultural element to it of comfort on the religious side as to music and ritual.
And also, how are you reaching out? Are you saying, hey, we need a choir director, or we need a welcomer, or, kind of token figures out front saying, hey, we're inclusive. Look, our choir director is Black. Or are you giving opportunities like having a Black service leader, not a service leader, but a worship, the president of the worship committee, something that is an actual position that's, I'm lacking words, not of power, but of substance, instead of just the choir director or the music director kind of thing. Does the church have literature up that's inclusive? Are there books and toys and stuff like that in the nursery that are inclusive? I think there's a lot that when you first walk in the door may put people off because they don't see these things. And it still just seems like a white church with some Black people that attend.
Just something I noticed when I was putting together my sermon on beloved community a couple weeks back. One of the things that I looked at was what are the actual stats in Unitarian Universalist churches across the country. And in 2010, just under 90% of members of UU churches were white. By 2014, it was only 78%. And when I began to dig a little and said, where is it really changing? The churches were becoming multiracial, and they were defining that as no more than 80% of the majority race. So there had to be at least 20% of minority races in there. There were really significant social justice issues going on that reached out to the community. Mm-hmm. And those churches have an overabundance. It's way outweighed in terms of a multiracial makeup of their congregations.
Interesting. Okay, that's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The one I've heard here in Wichita is, Olga, I'm sorry, I really like the message, but you all can't sing.
we know.
That is one of the things I like about our Zoom services, is that Kay and the other people on the worship committee have found video of people who actually can sing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I've been to several Black churches invited by somebody I knew from some other group, like Weight Watchers, and the music, it was like there were about 4 or 5 instruments and speakers everywhere, and the music was absolutely fantastic. Also, the hospitality was, you know, I thought, it's so marvelous. How can we kind of get ourselves going in this way? And it would be difficult because we are a very small community. And I think some of those, the Black churches are larger than we are. But that's an essence. I would like to bottle it and bring it to our church.
We have a member who comes to hear the sermons because he doesn't share the beliefs of the Black church, but he goes to the Black church to be with other Black people who share his culture.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's Rob. And we've had several conversations about what could we do to invite and make it more welcoming for other Black people. And I don't know if he said this to other people, but the things that he comes up with are things I can't quite imagine us doing. Like, he thinks we should just have a barbecue or something, you know. And I'm thinking, how would that work? But it's a cultural divide, you know. Am I so stuck in my own culture that I can't imagine doing something like that? And imagine that it would be helpful. So I haven't quite figured that out yet, but we have had some interesting conversations.
Well, we can do barbecues. I mean, you know, people do at home all the time.
Well,
why not do it at church? And
but would that draw people in?
Yeah,
you know, on more than just that one occasion.
Well,
okay. Well, it is winding up time. Any other final questions or comments before we move on?
Charles, this is Horst. I was at the Humanist annual meeting in Kansas City a couple of years ago, and David Breeden at that time was president, I believe, and he had brought in a Black woman who had started an organization that was a support group for Black people who wanted to, get out of the Baptist type churches. But they found that part of the problem is that the church is so integrated into the culture that if you withdraw as a Black person from the church, you're also ostracized the community and by your family if you make that kind of move. So, looking at our speakers tonight, their experience is in a sense atypical of what probably happens throughout much of the American in the urban areas. And so I'm thinking that that's part of the reason why we're not seeing a large number of people moving from one congregation to a UU congregation. So I'll leave it at that. There's so much more that can be said.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Horst. That's an interesting idea.
Charles, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate Rob and Joseph and Roxanne sharing this time with us this evening. And I have, so many questions going through my own mind about, my upbringing. And my father was raised a Southern Baptist from a small Western Kansas town. He was a racist. He lived a racist and died a racist at the age of 92. And I'm concerned at how religion, in a sense, in many ways seems to carry with it these kinds of biases and bigotries, as opposed to, working against them. So I know that was part of what you raised initially, Charles, when you were talking about this meeting this evening. But there's a lot of work to do. One of the things I wondered about is maybe just doing exchanges with some of us UUs go to a Black church and invite people from a Black church to come to some of our services or whatever. Just we don't have to worry about the purity of theology and those kinds of things. I think we ought to worry more about, how we relate to each other as people, as Rob was saying. And I think that would be maybe one way to approach that. So.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. Just build community instead of focusing on theology.
I'd like to remark about something, if I may.
Go right ahead.
A number of years ago, Lee and I got, as therapists, we got a contract from the school system for 70 obese people. And almost half of them were Black women. Only 2 were men in the whole thing, 2 white guys. But at least a third of them were Southern Baptist women in their belief system. And what I found quite interesting, we decided to do something quite different with this, because they only contracted for Lee to interview them to find their glitch in their life system that seemed to be messing up, because these are all really smart people. They all are teachers, or a lot of them had master's degrees. So if it were, and they had been through 3 to 6 weight loss programs already and failed. So we decided trying to educate them or do something on that level wasn't it. So she found the glitch with an interview of each of them. And then I spent a couple of hours with them in therapy, and I took them to, most of them, to their higher power. And I did it because I'm a hypnotist. I did it, and as a therapist, I did a method of that. And what I found interesting is that out of those 70 people, when they went to find their God, their higher power, only 2 of them had a God with kind of the stereotypic part, and only 3 had Jesus. That was stunning to me, that the higher power came as a voice, as energy, as a form of nebulous. It was, I found that quite interesting, that for people who tend to concretize the idea of Jesus quite a bit, and is in culture, that when it came time for them to go have a face-to-face in that realm, that's not what showed up. So anyway, I think in a way that speaks a little bit towards how can you bring people in that you don't need to do the stereotypic culture thing. And in fact, I think that's being perverted right now with what we're seeing with the right-wing stuff. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. It might be for you. Okay.
That is very interesting, Mike. Thank you. Well, I think we've about come to the end of the evening. I think we've actually gone past the end of the evening. But it's been such an interesting discussion. I didn't want to put any clamps on it. Let me mention that next month, Holger Meyer will be leading our discussion. And I believe he's going to be talking about the college or university system being corrupted by capitalism.
Right. Issues of what is liberal arts education useful for when everybody just talks about job skills, and why is tenure a useful and valuable system, or is it really just professors liking that they are employed for life and then can be lazy, or is there more to it than that maybe? You know, just a couple of days ago, Cornel West was offered a new contract at Harvard, but was not tenured, was not awarded tenure. And why does that matter? He was, he was offered a 10-year contract with a salary raise. So why is this other issue there? You know, why? What are universities for? What should they accomplish? What is the role of a university in a modern society? Some of those issues. I'm sure I can't touch on everything, but some of those things.
Okay, well, thank you, Holger. Holger always provides an interesting discussion, so I encourage you all to come join us next month. So, well, thank you, Roxanne. That was very interesting. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Joseph. I was very pleased with how things turned out tonight. And so, with that, I guess I'll shut it down and see you all later. So, goodbye.
Bye. Oh.